Ghostlight is a 2024 film directed by Kelly O'Sullivan and Alex Thompson. It's a film about grief and the healing power of art. This film has really high scores online so far. It's got a 100% critic approval rating and a 97% audience approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, as well as a 4.0 score on Letterboxd. But I don't hear that many people talking about this film, and it's largely because it is a smaller, lower budget independent film compared to some of the blockbusters that came out this year. For me personally, it was actually almost comically hard to see this in theaters. Out of the 5 or 6 movie theaters in my area, only one of the theaters was screening this film. It was only being screened for 1 week, and the screening times, it would be like 1 time per day at the most inconvenient time of the day. So when I did actually get the chance to see this in theaters, I ended up being the only one in the theater. But I'm so glad that I got the chance to watch it, because it ended up being one of my favorite films of the year, and I want to tell you why. I will also say that as of yesterday, this film is available for streaming on some platforms as well as purchase on other platforms. Heads up that I will be giving some minor spoilers for this film, but most of the spoilers are revealed within the first 30 minutes of the film anyways. So we follow the story of this middle America working class family. There's Dan Mueller, who's the father of the family, who's played by Keith Kupfer, and he's a blue-collar kind of working-class construction worker. There's Sharon, who's played by Tara Mullen, who's his wife, and then there's Daisy, who's his daughter, and is played by Catherine Kupfer. Prior to the events of the movie, the family's son Brian has committed suicide, and the family is in the middle of a wrongful death lawsuit with the ex-girlfriend of Brian, who they blame for his death. Everyone's kind of taking it really hard, but especially Dan. After Dan blows up on a stranger at work, he's approached by Rita, who suggests that he joins the local theater production. Rita can kind of tell that Dan could benefit from being someone else for a little while. Ironically though, the theater production is of Romeo and Juliet, which if you're not familiar is a Shakespeare play in which 2 young lovers end up committing suicide. So the fictional world that Dan is acting in starts to mirror his real life. I want to talk about how this movie is shot because it's beautiful, primarily the scenes on the stage. Most of this movie takes place in standard Middle America, but through the use of lighting, sound, and camera techniques, the stage is transformed into this magical place that's free from the chaos of life. One of my favorite shots of this film is actually when the actors go to the stage that they'll be performing at for the first time, and the stage is kind of framed as this magical, otherworldly place. Although ironically, there's a small frame in which it zooms back and shows how the stage actually looks, and it's a pretty typical just high school gymnasium. But it doesn't really matter how the stage actually looks, because the important thing is how it becomes transformed by the actors. The movie is able to make a lot out of a little with how it's shot and set, and there are no special effects or fancy set pieces to hide behind. It's all the different techniques used and the sound design as well as the character performances. So let's talk about the actors for a second then. The characters that they play all feel complex, nuanced, and real. And a big part of that is, well, a lot of it is real. You might have noticed this when I was reading out the cast names, but the 3 main cast members are actually a family in real life. Keith Kupfer is married to Tara Mullen, and Catherine Kupfer is of course their daughter in real life. And you can really see the chemistry they have together in some of the interviews that they've done for this movie. The highlight here is Keith Kupfer's character Dan, and you can really feel his anger, his sadness, and eventually his healing as he goes through his character journey. At the beginning of the movie, he can only feel anger. He bottles everything up and lets it out in one explosive burst. This ends up hurting strangers at work, his friends, and his family, and hurts all the people around him. And there are a few reasons that he ends up doing this. Within work, he has to suppress his feelings in order to get his job done. Through all of the legal proceedings with the wrongful death lawsuit, his lawyer advises him that he has to maintain emotional control and not get too emotional, even when being asked about his son's suicide. I think this film makes a point that within these legal proceedings, while they're originally meant to provide reparations to the families that were hurt, it ultimately ends up extending the family's suffering by not letting them grieve. Finally, and this is one of the major points, Dan has to suppress his emotions and let it out only through anger because of societal standards. I think this is true for many modern men who have only learned to express things through anger. When he starts expressing himself through art, however, it's not only productive, but it's healing to the people around him. This is true within the context of the play within the movie, where the characters find some emotional release from watching Dan perform on stage. But it's also true in this kind of meta way outside of the context of the play and within the movie itself. Alex Thompson, one of the directors of the film, was asked in an interview about movies that kind of came at the right point in his own personal life, and he shared a story where, after he was broken up with, he watched a screening of Sofia Coppola's Somewhere at an empty movie theater in the middle of the day and ended up bawling his eyes out. And as he was telling that story, I couldn't help but think about my own experience watching his movie in an empty theater. So, not only does this movie make a point about how art can be a better tool for handling stress, grief, and trauma, but also that the result of this is something that can be beautiful and can be healing for other people. And in its own existence as a film, it kind of proves that point, because we have people who have watched this and it's left a personal impact on their own lives outside of the movie. Overall, I give Ghostlight a 10 out of 10. I think it is a heartfelt, genuine, authentic film that's going to pull at your heartstrings and maybe even be something that becomes therapeutic. If you did see this film, let me know what you thought about it in the comments, and please subscribe if you want to see more movie reviews.